Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Inspiration Healthcare Group PLC investor presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged. They can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab that's just situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Please just simply type in your questions and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it is appropriate to do so. Before we begin, if I may, I would like to submit the following poll, and I would now like to hand you over to CEO Neil Campbell. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us today. Today I'm with Alan Olby, who joined us as CFO a couple of weeks ago. We're going to run through the results from our financial year ending January the 31st, 2023. Firstly, a little bit about the products we sell in the market we operate in. We deal with medical equipment primarily aimed at premature and sick babies. These babies can weigh as little as 350 grams, being born 23, 24 weeks gestation, so that's over 3 months premature. And putting it into context, the market size, around 15 million babies are born premature every year. That number's rising, and it's around 10% of the annual global birth rate. Different markets, different countries have different issues around prematurity. In the developed countries, it may be more around in vitro fertilization, stress, and very defensive forms of obstetric care for mums-to-be. And perhaps in the developing world, low middle income countries, it might be due to access to healthcare, maternal diets, and other socioeconomic conditions. But either way, the rates of prematurity are about 1 in 10 of all live births, and the complications from preterm birth are responsible for approximately 1 million deaths a year. And it's the largest cause of infant mortality in children under the age of 5 in the world today. We have a broad range of neonatal intensive care products in our portfolio, designed to support the most vulnerable of patients in the first few moments of life. And it's important to note that our products don't only reduce mortality, but they aim to improve the outcomes, to give these children and their families the very best opportunity in life. As we move through the presentation, hopefully you'll gain an insight into the company, what we do a little bit further, as well as our financial results for the year. A bit about our history. Well, I started the company with 3 very good friends back in 2003 as a private business. We were a distributor in the UK and Ireland with a very small amount of export. Over the next 10, 12 years, we grew the company and we got to around revenues of £10 million, still with no external investment, no external borrowings, when we found a company to acquire and we reversed onto AIM in June 2015. Subsequently, we invested in regulatory compliance and R&D, and then started our acquisition journey where we acquired 2 British companies, Viomedics in September 2019 and SLE in July 2020. Since then, we've re-engineered the company for further growth. And today we stand the company with revenues over £40 million, just over 200 employees, and we distribute our products to over 75 countries around the world, across mainland Europe, the Middle East, Japan, China, the United States, Canada, and into Latin America. Over 55% of our revenues now come from our own brand of products, either products we control the IP or we manufacture and design in-house. And over 55% of about 55% of our revenues now come from exports outside of the UK. Our achievements in our group, we have 2 companies in the group, Inspiration Healthcare Limited and SLE Limited, both holding Queen's Awards, one for innovation and one for export achievement. And we have 5 of our product groups in the company where we control the patents. On our journey to become a world leader, we have groundbreaking technologies, world-class support and education, and we're still a leading distributor of medical technology in the UK and Ireland, in other fields away from neonatology, such as infusion therapy. If we look at the investment case, building on solid foundations, we address a critical need. You can see that the birth rate is for premature babies is increasing, and it's a large and accessible market, well-funded market in the developed world for our products. We have strong leadership with proven commercial track record. I've been involved in medical equipment sales and marketing for some 30 odd years, and we have a lot of experience in our second tier management group. We have world-class expertise and best-in-class portfolio of innovative products that serve that critical need. And because of our relationship and our longevity, the relationships we develop with our customers, be those direct customers in the UK and Ireland, neonatologists, neonatal intensive care nurses, or distribution partners around the world, we've established and maintained deep relationships over a number of years. That means we're well positioned for future growth with an established commercial footprint and a clear and focused commercial strategy. Additionally, we've got proven M&A and organic growth over the last 20 years. Now we're going to come on to our highlights of our last financial year ending January 2023. I shall run over the first highlights and then Alan will go through the financial highlights. Obviously, it was a relatively difficult year for many companies with the war in Ukraine and continuing lockdowns in China as we still battle COVID-19. But we saw significant growth in our domestic business areas. Domestic for us is the UK and Ireland. And we also saw growth in our branded products, up 8%. We completed a transformational investment in our manufacturing and technology centre in Croydon, and we've started the rationalisation of our property portfolio, bringing more and more of our activities into the Croydon main facilities. We've continued to progress our strategy to become carbon neutral, and we'll talk a little bit about how we're doing that and why is that important for us. We prioritised our R&D team to look ahead for the MDR submissions. MDR is the medical device regulations in Europe, and in order to make sure that we meet the timetable that the EU are demanding, we made sure that we focused our R&D team to prioritise doing the testing, redeveloping, and making sure we submitted those technical files on time. I'm pleased to say that major products have all been submitted. We invested in inventory to secure long-term supply chain and meet customer demand. Supply chains are still fragile in the world, and we took a prudent view to secure that inventory when it was available. We saw growth in our infusion therapies business. We also learned that Project Wave had finished its clinical trial, and the recruitment has finished, and we're now waiting for the data to be analysed to be able to determine our next opportunity and pathway for Project Wave. And we've launched a number of additional products in the acute care area. Post year end, we've returned to being cash generative, and we also launched a range extension of our SLE 6000 flagship ventilators. I'll now pass over to Alan to look at the financial highlights.
Thanks, Neil. So just going through our financial highlights, this is for the financial year ended January 2023. Reported revenues for the group were essentially flat, showing very small growth of 0.4%, and reported at just over £41 million. The group experienced quite significant impact from global macroeconomic factors. As Neil said, there are important distribution arrangements in both China and Russia, and sales into those customers actually declined during the year when the group had expected to see quite a contribution of growth in those markets. At the same time, gross margins declined by 6 percentage points to 44%. This is due to the mix of products sold and the geographic mix across sales made in the year. It's important to note that it is not linked to increases in cost of goods, but just product and geographic mix in sales, and we can explain a bit more about that in a minute. The group is profitable at the EBITDA level. We reported 4 million of EBITDA in the last financial year, down from 6.4 million in the prior year due to the lower gross margin achieved on sales. Admin expenses were actually almost flat in the year, which is a good result in a high inflationary environment, and so the reduction in EBITDA is just down to lower margins. Net debt at the end of January stood at 3.8 million. there was a £13 million cash outflow in total across the year. The bulk of this was down to the investment in the new Manufacturing Technology Centre in Croydon, which is now housing the bulk of those activities for the group and is providing a very solid foundation for the group's future growth. That investment is now complete, and so there's no further investment in this site in the current and future years. There was an increase in inventories, as Neil alluded to, as we looked to secure supply of raw materials to ensure we could manufacture and meet customer demand. And there has been an increase in receivables due to the weighting of sales in the last couple of months of the financial year. Both of those are expected to normalise over the course of the current financial year, and we expect to see a positive working capital contribution in the current financial year. There was also some aborted acquisition costs and a couple of exceptional items contributing to the cash outflow. Towards the end of the year, there was a new financing facility put in place, secured against the company's invoices, which gives us total borrowings of £10 million as we move into the current financial year. At the end of January, that gave us £6 million of overall headroom on our debt facilities, and as highlighted a minute ago, we were cash generative in the first quarter, so headroom has now improved. Final point is that there is a proposed final dividend of 0.4p for the financial year, which is being put to the vote at the AGM next week. Just a bit of illustration around the revenue and the moving parts in revenue and EBITDA here. Importantly, we grew branded product sales by £1.9 million in the year. That's an 8% growth rate on the core branded products within the group's portfolio. And the infusion business, which is aimed at adult patients, also grew by £2.1 million. Infusion sales are 100% distributed sales. Against that, there was a loss of distributed revenue for ventilators, which was a planned exit of certain distribution arrangements following the purchase of SLE back in 2020 and now having our own ventilator sales. And on the back of that, technology support revenues also decreased as we handed that responsibility back to the distributors on those distributed ventilators that we're no longer selling. Those are all higher margin sales, and it's the loss of those distribution rights and loss of that technology support that has weighed on the gross margin in the last financial year. Looking at EBITDA, the illustration here shows that actually operating costs were essentially flat, increasing by just £0.1 million for the year, and it was the loss of gross margin of £2.5 million linked to the mix of sales revenues as discussed that resulted in the EBITDA decreasing from just over £6 million to £4 million for the last financial year. As far as cash flow is concerned, as I've discussed a minute ago, there was just over £6 million of working capital outflows linked to investing in inventory and securing supplies to the critical components to secure our revenues, and an increase in receivables given the weighting of sales that we saw in a very busy final 6 weeks of the financial year. We expect to see a normalisation of those levels over the course of the current financial year and to return that to a positive working capital situation. We also have capitalised development costs linked to some of our R&D and clinical trial activities, and as explained at the beginning, just over £6 million invested in the new Manufacturing and Technology Centre in Croydon. Again, those costs ended during the course of the last financial year, and there's no further investment in this facility for next year. On the financing side, as I said, we have £10 million in overall debt facilities. There's a £5 million revolving credit facility and a £5 million invoice discounting facility, which gives us, across the piece, quite a significant amount of flexibility in terms of how and when we use those. We use those facilities to meet up with our working capital and cash flow requirements. In terms of the balance sheet, the only important or the material movement here is the increase in property, plant and equipment following the investment in the manufacturing facilities here, and the movement in net cash, which we've analysed and explained on the previous tab. Just moving on to give a bit more colour on the revenue split and the geographic split of revenue over the next couple of slides. We look at our revenue in a couple of different ways. Firstly, in terms of product ownership, as Neil said, we've got just over 55%, closer to 60% of our revenues on company-owned branded products where we have the IP. There's 33% of the revenues from distributed products, and then the balance of technology support, which declined, as we said, because of the handing back of some of the distribution rights to certain ventilator products. In terms of the market sectors, the acute care, the neonatal division of the business is by far the largest. We're almost at £30 million of sales now. That's over 70% of revenues. The infusion therapy division, which grew nicely in the last financial year, now contributes just over 22% of sales. On a geographic basis, UK and Ireland, which is our domestic division, accounts for almost 50% of group revenues in the last financial year. And the next largest contribution comes from Asia Pacific region, including China, but also important distribution arrangements into Japan, Taiwan, and Australia and Indonesia in particular. Slight decline from the prior year because of the impacts of lockdowns in China and therefore the inability to get product into China last year. Europe represents 13%, Middle East and Africa a similar proportion, and then lastly the Americas just 3%, and this is one region in particular which is underrepresented for the group at the moment. The US represents a very significant opportunity, and this is a region that we expect to see some quite significant growth from in the coming years. And I'll now hand you back to Neil just to look at the rest of the slide deck.
Thanks, Alan. So if you look at our business model next, it's a relatively simple business model. We have our in-house R&D and innovation at the top. That then feeds into manufacturing and supply. And on top of that, we actually have complementary distribution technologies and partnerships with companies where we will sell their products to add value to our sales call, either that's directly in the UK and Ireland, or sometimes we'll sell them overseas if they add value to the products we're exporting. That then goes through our route to market to our distributors directly in the UK and Ireland, as I've said, or distributor partners around the world. The distributors will then take those products and engage with customers and offer them both with education and technology support to be able to make sure that the products have as much value added to them as possible. That then further moves around to our revenue and profit, and then we reinvest back into R&D. So we're actually a relatively simple business model for the company. We mentioned our portfolio of products and the best-in-class specialist neonatal products, and we have a blend of products that are both capital equipment and consumables. So we benefit from capital one-off revenues and recurring revenues. As we look on the right-hand side of the slide, we have the first three there, the LifeStart, the unique CFM and the SLE ventilators. They're all very much capital equipment. And they'll retail for anything from £5,000 or £6,000 up to the top of the range. SLE ventilators would be in the low to mid £30,000 as capital equipment. And the life expectancy of those products will be probably 7 years or 7 years plus. That then allows us to benefit from the tech support revenues, planned preventative maintenance and spare parts as part of recurring revenues for those particular products. To the middle and the left-hand side, we have some disposable products. We have various breathing circuits. This is the products the tubing that will take the air and oxygen mixture from the ventilator towards the interface for the patient. And then you'll see the first breath and Inspire nasal CPAP devices that will actually interface with the patient and allow that air and oxygen to be delivered to the patient to meet their respiratory needs. And we also have our Inspire RPAP device, which gives the first breath of life. So with the LifeStart, a resuscitation platform, with the RPAP giving the first breath of life, and then the mixture of the other products, we support the patient from actually the moment they're born, hopefully to the time they can actually leave the intensive care unit. That gives us a mix of about 2/3 capital and 1/3 recurring revenues, and so we're not reliant purely and simply on capital budgets around the world. When we look at focusing on accelerating our growth, we have significant market growth due to the market that we're in. The neonatal market is growing around about 6.5% a year on year, and 2023 it's estimated that would be a market of about $7.7 billion. But we've also got an existing footprint and commercial pathway into 75 countries around the world. And where we have existing products and existing markets, so through where we've already got regulatory clearance in the EU, some of our ventilators are cleared in China and Japan, for example. We need to optimize the opportunity for selling those into those countries, working well with our distribution partners to maximize the opportunity there, and leveraging those route to markets where we do have that regulatory clearance. On top of that, our plan is to expand our geographic footprint by gaining further regulatory clearance of products that are perhaps not already available in those markets yet, or getting all of our products, some of our products, into new markets. At the moment, we do very little in the United States, so none of the SLE brand of ventilators are sold in the United States, so it makes sense for us to look at regulatory clearance in the US, for example. We've got a strong R&D team. We've unfortunately, over the last couple of years, we've had to use the R&D team here to either do the MDR work for product compliance and regulatory compliance in the European Union, or to switch components from where we couldn't find components were going out of production in various supply chains around the world. So our R&D team are now starting to get focus back on bringing new products into those existing markets, and we continue to invest in R&D. And on top of that, we will look at the inorganic growth of strategic acquisitions, where we'll look to acquire IP through either a corporate transaction or strategic alliance/licensing agreements. If we look now at the investments we've made from our own balance sheet over the last 12 months, 15 months or so, when we acquired SLE in July 2020, it was a very typically British manufacturing company that had grown and added various buildings along the way, and it was functional but relatively inefficient. We found a site less than 2.5 miles away from that site. We wanted to keep the staff, very talented and loyal workers that we'd acquired with the acquisition, and we refurbished a site in Croydon to around 50,000 square feet, 4,200 or so square meters, and state-of-the-art manufacturing and office space. We've not only increased our capacity, we've also increased our capability. We've got better R&D facilities with better laboratories for the R&D team to design, develop, test new ideas that they're having and working on with new products. We've got a new technology support centre where we've got greater space for planned preventative maintenance or repairs that need to come back into the manufacturer ourselves to be fixed before they can be turned around and sent away. And we've also got a better education centre for both clinical education and for biomedical engineering training, so we can have more of our distribution partners, their sales team, their technicians, or customers coming from the UK NHS coming to actually be trained on our products. The facilities have been designed with a low carbon footprint. We have green spaces in the buildings. We have palm trees, for example, that absorb a lot of carbon dioxide, so we have less air changes, which keeps the cost of our ventilation and heating down. They've been designed for staff well-being. We sit-stand workbenches and sit-stand desks for all staff to make sure that the staff can be comfortable whilst they work. And obviously we've designed that to optimize efficiency of getting components into the building through manufacturing in a proper thought out process and out to our main warehousing to be as quickly and effectively and efficient as we can do, rather than moving across buildings as we were before. So we really have invested in a state-of-the-art manufacturing and technology centre here in Croydon. And just here we've got some photos of our staff in various parts of the building. In the top left, the top centre, we've got some people, Laura and a colleague looking at a new ventilator. We've got colleagues in customer service and the customer service office finishing off the top row. And then at the bottom, you see some of our clinical education facilities and our warehousing and manufacturing facilities based here in Croydon. Talking a little bit about R&D and regulatory, we've touched on these already. It's important to make sure that we were fully compliant with the EU's timetable, for the technical file submission to be submitted. The EU just at the beginning of this year has actually extended the timetable for MDR because they realised exactly how difficult it was for companies to be pushing every product through the new processes. We're very pleased that our team managed to get all of our technical files into our notified body before the end of 2022. So we feel in very good shape to make sure that we'll be compliant to those new EU regulations this year. The US, we've started engaging with the FDA to determine the pathway for submissions for our products. And we hope to have some further news on where we are with FDA submissions over the forthcoming months. Actually, on R&D itself, we've already made progress to improve the portfolio, and we've expanded that portfolio. We've launched one range extension to the SLE 6000 range, taking it into more non-invasive modes, so being able to treat less sick children, or perhaps the babies who are getting better and on their way progressing out of the intensive care unit, and that should open up an opportunity for further sales for us. And Project Wave, our novel respiratory support device, has completed the trial recruitment, and the analysis is underway as to the trends as to what we would expect to see the effectiveness of that device. It's important to note that we were only looking at 17 babies in this study, so we were not looking to see whether the trial to tell us a completely binary outcome of yes or no. But we do know that the product was accepted well by the babies. They didn't cry, they weren't grumbling. Mums and dads accepted that the product on the baby, didn't get stressed about seeing their baby with a novel device on them. And the nurses were more than happy to put the device on the baby and keep it on the baby. So we know that there's good acceptance. We just now need to see the results of the trends of whether it did reduce or how much it reduced apnea with prematurity and intermittent hypoxia. And I've mentioned the post-year-end launch of the SLE range already. Looking at our environmental and social strategy, the NHS has determined a net zero requirement for suppliers for 2035, and we're running ahead of that NHS requirements. Sorry, 2040, I believe, 2035, I think it's the Scotland NHS. Our new manufacturing and technology centre uses only renewable energy, and we have solar thermal systems and natural ventilation built into the building to reduce our carbon footprint here, as well as those internal green spaces. Our carbon emissions, scope 1 and 2 and 3, have started putting measurements in place, although we've got the tier 1 suppliers into scope 3 at the moment. As we go down our supply chain, we will use put more measurements into the tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. Our current car fleet is 66% fully electric and 34% hybrid, as we encourage our staff to move away from petrol and diesel cars. We're adopting a recycle and reuse scheme for our supply chain packaging, where we use less and less cardboard, and we send back boxes to be refilled by our supplier. And we've been investing in sit and stand desks for staff comfort, as I've already mentioned. So we've made quite strong progress on our environmental and social strategy. In summary, we've had a resilient financial performance in an unprecedented year of challenges. Revenues were broadly flat year on year. Adjusted EBITDA was down year on year. And our cash we used to invest in our building and our supply chain. And our cash headroom at the end of the year was 6.2 million. As I mentioned, we're cash generative in the first quarter, and therefore our cash headroom at the end of the first quarter was about 8 million. Manufacturing and technology centres already delivering efficiencies, and we'll get further efficiencies as we move more of our activities into the Croydon facility here. Our products have been submitted for MDR to ensure long-term revenues and competitive advantage. I've seen growth in the UK through our infusion therapies business and growth in our own branded products. We've invested in inventory levels to secure our supply chain, and as mentioned, we're well ahead on our carbon neutral journey. Quarter one finished in line with management plans, and we continue to explore strategic opportunities. And following a strong fourth quarter and the end of our financial year 2023, the year has commenced in line with our plans. And whilst uncertainties remain, we are cautiously optimistic that we'll return to our usual growth patterns. Thank you. We now open up for questions.
Neil, Alan, thank you very much indeed for your presentation this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions just by using the Q&A tab that's situated on the top right-hand corner of your screen. But just while the team take a few moments to review those questions that were submitted already, I would like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your investor dashboard. Alan, Neil, as you can see there in the Q&A tab, we have received a number of questions throughout your presentation this afternoon, and thank you to all of those on the call for taking the time to submit their questions. But guys, if I may just hand back to you to respond to those where it's appropriate to do so, and then I'll pick up from you at the end. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We're just looking at the questions as we go through. Alan, do you want to talk a bit about capex allocation, or would you prefer me to, as you're relatively new to the company?
Well, I'll talk about that a little bit, but as Neil said, I've just joined the company a couple of weeks ago, and so I'm still learning about priorities and getting to know certain parts of the business. But I think obviously the capital allocation last year was very significantly skewed towards investment in the new facility and to provide this fantastic base that we have that gives us the capabilities and the capacity we need to take the group to its next level and to have the capacity to grow and increase production over future years. Going forwards, capital investments will be significantly lower and will be focused towards R&D and investment in the products. So we have a separate R&D process where all projects are analysed and reported on a monthly basis. And I think looking at capital allocations for those is something that we will get into, or I will get into in the coming months.
Okay, thanks, Alan. There's a question about cost inflation on components and inventory. Do you want me to?
Yeah, I can't answer that one yet, I'm afraid.
What we did a couple of probably about 18 months ago, we started securing long-term contracts with our suppliers at fixed prices, and therefore all the time we took the products or the components, the inventory, onto some of those contracts. We maintained the prices on the components that we were buying. So we had a choice earlier in the year: do we slow down our inventory rates, but then actually have to renegotiate price, or do we keep our inventory rates going up but get better margins? So we've had a bit of a mixture of that. Most of them we actually took some extra stock, and you can see in our balance sheet we've actually increased the working capital through our inventory. That has meant we've had lower inflationary pressures on our components. We have had some, and that's linked to another question about price increases, and we have had some cost increases, and we actually did increase our prices to our customers. We did a couple of relatively small price increases, sort of low middle percentages twice. We've did that over the last 12 months or so. So we have actually passed on price increases where we actually have had them to our customers. So the margining, as Alan said, the margin effect of going from 50% down to 44% was really driven purely by product mix and not by not being able to recover inflationary pressures. The next question we've got is about Project Wave, and it's assuming the forthcoming Project Wave trial data meets its target clinical goals, i.e. positive, then how does Inspiration Healthcare plan to commercialise the technology and over what timescale? What's the extra investment will be required? Well, we still don't know quite the outcome. We're waiting for the medical research team to actually show us the data. That's still with them as they analyse it. The way the clinical trial was set up, this was blinded to us. Although we do know that it's safe. The data safety committee has shared the safety data with us. So if it does meet its clinical goals, then we'll be able to launch the product. We've got a product that would meet the regulatory requirements, so we'd have to submit it for CE marking. At the moment, CE marking would probably take somewhere between 12 and 18 months. That's probably a 3 or 4 month lead time for us to be able to submit, and then the notified body review time at the moment, unfortunately, is somewhere around 12 months or so because of the backlog of pressures in the EU. So we're probably a couple of years away from being able to see good revenues generated from Project Wave, but that obviously is dependent on what the outcomes will be from the trial. The amount of investment we would need to make, I suppose we'll look at how the product actually, the feedback from the nurses of how the product actually worked and how easy it was to put on the babies, and how well it stayed in place and how easy it was to use, and look at some refinements in the application and the human factors usability type of work. So that may need several tens of thousands. Hopefully, it won't need huge amounts of capital, but the submission for CE marking obviously will be potentially significant, depending on what the external tests we have to do on the device before we can actually finalise the technical file. Just looking through some of the other questions, trying to answer all of them as we go through. A question about our key USPs versus larger competitors like GE, Philips, Draeger, Verk and Medtronic. I guess this one's another one for me.
Right, sir.
We're very much focused on neonatal intensive care. We're a relatively small company with a relatively strong focus. We look at the baby from, say, 23 weeks gestational age through to term and see the changes in that baby. So we really focus on how we can support the neonatologist, the neonatal intensive care nurse, and the clinical team looking after those babies, and with a greater understanding and empathy of how they're actually working day by day to see the physical changes, physiological changes in that child. So I think our USP is the way we approach the customer. We're very much focused on that neonatal intensive care, that first few months, few hours, few days, few weeks of life, as opposed to perhaps our larger competitors who have a broader range of products and sell into different areas of the hospital. Our sales team is very focused, and our distributors are very focused on neonatal intensive care, and trying to have a broad portfolio to look at how the baby, or to support the customer as the baby develops, as the lungs develop and surfactant comes into the lungs, or as the the brain develops and the cortex joins up with the subcortex. Having that understanding and that knowledge about and empathy with the neonatologist and the neonatal intensive care team is really our USP. There's a question on China after a tough 2022 regarding China and Russia. How is the demand picture, pipeline and sales conversion progressing so far in 2023? Do you want me to answer that one?
Yeah, there's not much we can really say about that in the current financial year, is there, beyond what we've said in the outlook statement.
Yeah, with the in China we have seen a slight return to activity, which is positive. So hopefully that will actually continue to grow. But obviously we're very cautious about what revenues we'll get out of China and Russia this year. The last question is year-to-date 23 gross margins tracking back to historical levels, i.e. 50% versus 44% last year. Paul, do you want? Sorry, Paul. Sorry, Alan.
Again, we can't give out any financial data on current year trading and current year performance, but I think it is safe to say that the margins of 44% last year were a function of the sales mix delivered in FY 2023. In the current financial year, we do expect to see a more favourable sales mix, which should see margins recover. I'm not going to put a number on the level or where it's at year to date, but our expectation certainly is that margins will be recovering and improving on what was reported last year.
I think that's the last of the questions we've had. So I'll summarise by saying thank you very much for coming and listening to us present today. I think that probably the most important thing for us to say is that we had, following that strong quarter of the end of last year, this year has commenced in line with our own plans. And while those uncertainties to remain, we are cautiously optimistic that we'll return to our usual growth patterns. Thank you.
Neil, that's great. And Alan as well. Thank you very much indeed for updating investors this afternoon. Could I please ask investors not to close this session, as you'll now be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the management team can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete, but I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of Inspiration Healthcare Group PLC, we would like to thank you for attending today's presentation. That now concludes today's session, so good afternoon to you all.